What's up, Packer fans? I'm Narad Chapik, host of Portland Packers podcast. Thank you for being here, and thank you for checking out this video. The Green Bay Packers 2020 schedule was officially released 24 hours ago. I've had some time to dive into it, and boy, the NFL is not taking it easy on the Packers in this upcoming season. I'm going to break it down for you. I'm going to give you some of my key points, my final season predictions, my way too early predictions, quite frankly. Guys, it is time to pour ourselves another Packers podcast. So as always, real quick before we get started, if you are not a subscriber to the channel, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. I know that these videos will randomly just pop up along your suggested content. If you're a Packers fan, even if you're an NFL fan and just enjoy the content, click subscribe. I try to do videos weekly, but we're in a little bit of an off-season mode, and we're going to get back to the full swing of things once life resumes back to normal. At least hopefully that's the plan. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of some key points from just breaking down this schedule. And I know that the retention rate or the viewer rate usually drops after 3, 4, or 5 minutes. So if you can't stick around for the whole video as I break down the entire schedule, here's some of the things that stood out to me, at least from looking at the schedule. First things first, Packers end up with 5 primetime games. Once again, this seems to be a reoccurring thing for the Green Bay Packers, and the NFL is just more than aware that the Packers bring in viewership, and not only in the U.S., but across the world. So the 5 primetime games line up with 8 other teams that also have that luxury throughout the season. Our matchups are in Week 3 against New Orleans, Week 4 at Atlanta, Week 4 at home against Atlanta, Week 9 at San Francisco, Week 12 at home against Chicago. That's the only division rivalry game that we have on primetime. And then Week 16 against the Tennessee Titans, of course, Matt LaFleur's old team. So I got to love the fact that they play in these primetime slots. 3 of the 4 are on Sunday Night Football, 1 Monday night game against Atlanta, and then a Thursday night matchup on a very short week heading over to San Francisco. But I'll get to that here in just another second, or a couple minutes, I suppose. The Week 5 bye is the next big key point that I want to bring up. So this is obviously not favorable for teams in the NFL. It's actually the earliest bye week in the 2020 season, and they share that with the Detroit Lions. The final bye week of the season comes in Week 11 this year, where last year it was in Week 12, but it's a complete 180 because the Packers had a Week 11 bye in the 2019 season. They were able to build up a lot of momentum, went into the break sitting at 8-2, and you kind of thought that the Packers, would benefit from having a later on bye week. I personally believe that is the case as well. And just quite frankly, the first 4 games of the season, the whole first half of the season is really tough, but I don't like having that early bye week. You typically don't have any injuries. If we would have had an early bye week last year when Davante Adams was hurt, it wouldn't really have changed anything as far as the core or the foundation of the team. So that is a disadvantage when looking at this schedule. But outside of that, the biggest disadvantage that I see looking at this schedule is that first half of the season, weeks 1 through 9, are quite frankly a little bit of a gauntlet that the Packers are really going to have to figure out how to get through. They can't start out slow. They can't sit Aaron Rodgers all 4 preseason games because they were able to come away with a victory in Week 1 last year against the Bears. But it was sloppy. It was a defensive struggle. We thought that after that game, our defense would be able to carry our team the whole way. Spoiler alert, it all fell apart in the NFC Championship game. But looking at that first 9 weeks of the season, we play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 playoff teams from last season. And yes, the Vikings are in there twice, but 5 playoff teams from last year we play in the first 9 weeks. And most of those games, 5 of those games actually, are on the road as well. Speaking of that, though, things turn a little bit better in the second half of the season. We finish off 4 of our last 6 games at Lambeau Field in the months of November and December. That's a huge bonus, but the Packers are going to have to climb that hill very early on, and then hopefully it's nothing but smooth sailing the rest of the season. The last little key point that I wanted to make mention of, I guess, before we dive into each individual game, is you'll see that week 15 is to be determined as far as when the game is, what the date is. There are currently 9 games scheduled for that Sunday, which is the 20th of December, and there are 5 games that are still left to be determined. There were some rumors and speculation that Roger Goodell would want to play some NFL games on Saturday. College football would be essentially, the regular season would be over. They're waiting for the bowl games at that point. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Packers play a Saturday football game in late December. But hopefully that's not the case, because I would have to take a vacation day from work just to watch the Packers. Of course, unless it's a primetime game, in which case I can definitely make that work within my schedule. But let's dive into the schedule overall. I mean, this is a very emotional. It's not really that emotional, but it's 1 year ago, my very first video of Pour Another Packers podcast. My very first video was the schedule release video. So we have gone a full year, a little bit longer technically, because the schedule came out later than normal. But I had to go back and watch it, and boy, I've come a long ways in just 1 year as far as the editing and the scope, and I guess my confidence level as well. But I digress. Let's get started. So week 1, we face off at Minnesota. This is obviously a huge matchup to start this season. I'm surprised it wasn't a later game in the day, quite frankly, with the Packers and Vikings, especially when the late season, I think it was a week 16 matchup last year, was one of the highest rated games of the 2019 season. But we travel over to Minnesota week 1, and like I had preluded to before, the Packers will not be able to rest on their laurels. Aaron Rodgers will have to have some preseason time, game time, just so he's not out there and completely rusty, because those division games matter. It's going to be potentially a very boisterous US Bank Stadium crowd, unless things prevent that from happening where they don't play with fans, but who knows how that's going to shake out. But yeah, they're going to have the entire offseason preparing for that week 1 matchup. They know about it right now. That has to get the blood pumping, the heart beating faster, knowing that matchup's around the corner. I do like Green Bay's chances of going into Minnesota and winning that game solely because they have the entire offseason to prepare for that week 1 matchup. So I do see the Packers starting out at 1-0, but I think they do split these games, and I'll get to that in a second. Week 2, they face off against the Detroit Lions, those pesky Lions that I seem to look past every single year as the bottom of our division team, but they play us hard. And last year it took 2 last-second field goals for us to beat the Detroit Lions. It'll be the first home game of the season at Lambeau. I think that bodes well for the Packers. I do think that they take care of business against the Detroit Lions, knowing that they have back-to-back division matchups to start the season. And we'll start the season 2-0. But then things get a little bit shaky, and I start to give the Packers their first loss, or I will give the Packers their first loss of the season, when they head down to New Orleans to face off against the Saints. Now, this is our first primetime game. It's a Sunday night football matchup. Drew Brees versus Aaron Rodgers, potentially Drew Brees' last season in New Orleans, and then Aaron Rodgers just kind of manning that quarterback throne for as long as he can. It's like I said, potentially the last matchup against them. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch, but there's only so many teams in the league that hold that home field advantage really strong, and it's almost impossible to win at home against them. You're looking at teams like the Seattle Seahawks. You're looking at teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, with Arrowhead Stadium being one of the loudest out there. And then you look at teams like the New Orleans Saints. These are tough places to win. Sunday Night Football, they have a ton of talent on that team. Should have probably went deeper in the playoffs than they did. So I do give the Packers their first loss on Sunday night against the Saints. But then they rebound in week 4 and face off against the Atlanta Falcons. So another primetime game, this time on Monday Night Football. You have Matt Ryan and Julio Jones coming to Green Bay. I love that. I mean, we were 7-1 at home last season. I love the idea of the Packers continuing to build that home field advantage throughout the course of this entire season. But the Falcons have been a struggling team the last couple of years. A little bit of a head scratcher of a team the last couple of years. They've struggled with some injuries and just lack of heart or effort across the board. So I think that, I mean, it's too early to tell what kind of Atlanta Falcons team is going to come to the table. But I like the Packers entering their bye week with a victory against the Falcons and head into the bye week sitting at a 3-1 record, which I think is a best case scenario for them looking at the first 4 matchups. Week 5 is a bye week, as I alluded to before or mentioned before. I'm not a huge fan of that bye week, but if there's any benefit that comes from the Packers having that Week 5 bye, is that they get to prepare for their next opponent, which is Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski, Patriots 2.0, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at Tampa Bay, mind you. And they head down there in Week 6. It's an afternoon kickoff. It's on Fox. It's going to be America's game of the week. We haven't had a lot of Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady matchups in the past. We've kind of been stolen those opportunities, especially looking back at the 2014 NFC Championship game against the Seattle Seahawks. So obviously, a lot of hype is going to be built around this team. I personally am not on the hype train, though, for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quite yet. I think that there's Tom Brady's still in his mid-40s. Rob Gronkowski is coming off of a year removed in the NFL. I don't think that they're going to be as good as what people think they're going to be. I still think it'll be a great matchup, but this will be one of those road victories that I think that we will end up stealing along the way and come away sitting at a 4-1 record after Week 6. Week 7, we head down to Houston. This is the first of 3 consecutive playoff team matchups that we will face, and this is really going to be an interesting stretch for the Green Bay Packers. Houston Texans were a solid football team last year, but this past offseason, they trade away DeAndre Hopkins, and Bill O'Brien just kind of seems like he's gone senile, maybe a little bit of a Ted Thompson-esque mentality where the team has kind of crumbled all around the Texans. Not to say that they won't be a good team, but even though we are on the road, I do think that we come away with a victory against the Texans as well. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns. Have the Packers really filled all the holes that they needed to do or needed to fill in the offseason? And can they really put together a string of victories through this gauntlet and come away from that Texans game sitting at 5-1? Possibly. I think that the Packers we'll find some challenging in the next 2 weeks, but I like them heading down to Houston once again. It's October 25th. You're in the Dome. I think that things will go well. And Aaron Rodgers has played very well in the state of Texas. Houston probably has the best quarterback in the state of Texas with Deshaun Watson, but I think that they'll take care of business and come away with another victory. Week 8, we face the Vikings for the second and final time of the regular season. Minnesota now travels to Green Bay, and it's really interesting. We play the Vikings twice before we even get a chance to play the Bears once. But I see this probably going 50-50 a couple of ways. Now, if we do come away with a victory in Week 1 at Minnesota, you have to believe that the Vikings are a talented enough football team to want revenge, and I don't think one way or the other, I don't think that we sweep Minnesota in back-to-back seasons. I think the Vikings are going to steal one of these games. If it's Week 1, Packers come away with a victory in Week 8. If it's vice versa, the Vikings will win on the road at Lambeau Field in Week 8. But one way or the other, the Vikings will give us a loss, and we would sit at essentially a 5-2 record heading into our Week 9 matchup against the San Francisco 49ers, and I just don't see things going well. I think that this is the one thing that stood out on the schedule to me more than anything else was that they had to face off against the Vikings. Yes, thankfully that matchup is at home, but 4 days later, they not only have to travel to play on Thursday Night Football, but they have to travel to San Francisco, where our 2 worst games, our 2 worst performances took place last year. Can the Packers come away and steal a victory? Maybe. I'll probably pick them when the week actually rolls around this fall. But we haven't seen. There's going to be an element of revenge, but there's also going to be that potential playoff seeding matchup in that Week 9 against the 49ers. I think that they will continue to rebound, or I think the 49ers will continue to be a strong contender in the league. They might slip a little bit, but I think that they'll be one of the best teams in the league once again. They haven't had a lot of turnover, and they're just going to get better year over year. I see the Packers losing at San Francisco Thursday night. There's just too many things going against them. Heading to California, playing a team that has really kind of shook you your last 2 matchups, and a short week. Combine all that, I think we come away with another loss. So at that point, we would be sitting right around that 5-3 record through 9 weeks. And at that point, you're probably sounding the alarm. You're thinking, okay, it's time to put good old Jordan Love in. Let's see what he can do. That's not the case, because things will turn around for the better. You're at 3 losses through 9 weeks, and the schedule starts to turn. The schedule starts to get easier. Week 10, the Jacksonville Jaguars come to town, and presumptively, Gardner Minshew will be the starting quarterback in Jacksonville this season, and he will get a chance to shine at Green Bay, at Lambeau Field. I don't think he's going to come away with a victory. The Jacksonville Jaguars are a very fun team to watch, but I see the Packers taking care of business at home in Jacksonville and move themselves to 6-3. Week 11, we face off against the Colts, who have continued to struggle to fill that backup, or I guess I was going to say the backup quarterback, but the hole that Andrew Luck left them at quarterback. Yeah, they had Jacoby Brissett, and they seem to be okay with that sort of a combination for a quarterback, but I don't think the Colts are going to have that stellar of a season once again. And I see the Packers being able to head over to Indianapolis and take away another victory. Week 12 is our Sunday night matchup against the Chicago Bears. The NBC loves to host these Sunday night matchup games against the Chicago Bears. And once again, what are we going to get out of the Bears? It seems like they're not really interested in picking up Mitch Trubisky's fifth-year option. So it seems like they're starting to play around with the idea of replacing Mitch Trubisky at quarterback. I actually have a gut feeling, and this is all this is, but I have a feeling that by week 12 of this year, the Bears will be in such a disarray of what they have at quarterback that they will go out there and sign Cam Newton and bring him to the Chicago Bears. And it could very well be a Rodgers versus Cam Newton matchup on Sunday Night Football, Packers-Bears. This game is at home. The Packers are, again, going to be a solid home team throughout the year. I see them taking care of business on prime time against their rival, who we've had their number the last couple years. We come away with a victory. Week 13, the Philadelphia Eagles come back to town. Now, the Eagles were the only team to beat Green Bay at home last year, Thursday Night Football. I was at that game. It was a high-scoring affair. There was no defense to be found whatsoever. It was the game where Devontae Adams got injured, and then they just couldn't put any offense together. Jimmy Graham was dropping touchdowns in the end zone. But regardless, I think that game sticks in the Packers' mind. I think that they come away with another victory in Week 13. It's a 3:15 or 3:25 game. It's our only CBS game of the year, thank the Lord. And I think the Eagles, who are also just kind of in that drafting Jalen Hurts, they're adding discomfort and discontent to their locker room by going out there and grabbing another quarterback. So there might be some dysfunction in the good old city of Philadelphia this upcoming season. Week 14, we head to Detroit. This is a noon game at Detroit, and I don't think that we've managed to sneak away 2 victories from the Detroit Lions. Too often over the course of the last 5, 6, 7 years, we've traveled to Detroit, and it's just been an absolute kryptonite for the Packers to go over to that stadium and play well. It doesn't matter whether the Detroit Lions are good or bad or somewhere in between. We do not play good at Ford Field in Detroit, and I don't think the Packers are going to keep their streak of wins alive at that point. I see them rattling off 1, 2, 3, 4 wins in a row after that 49ers loss to be sitting there at 9-3. But then we head over to Detroit. I'm going to give us an upset loss to the Detroit Lions, and we would move to 9-4 at that point. But then there are 3 games left. 3 games to kind of finish the season off strong and make your way into the playoffs, presumably as a 2-3 seed, maybe a 1 seed at that point, but I don't think that's going to happen with the way that this schedule shakes out. Week 15, we face off against the Carolina Panthers. It's a new look Carolina Panthers with Teddy Bridgewater under center at the quarterback position. You still have Christian McCaffrey. I think that offense could potentially have a lot of firepower and be a lot of fun to watch, but they're under a new head coach who brings some energy into that team. I think it will be a close game. It was a close game last year when we faced off against the Panthers in that snowy weather. It came down to a goal line stop to prevent the Carolina Panthers from winning that game. This is a to-be-determined time and date, but regardless, the Panthers are coming to Green Bay, and I like Green Bay's chances of winning that game. So at that point of the season, depending on what happens to that Vikings game, we have 2 weeks left, 2 games left, and I have the Packers undefeated at home with 7 wins at home with 2 remaining games in the season. And I think that takes a slight turn in Week 16. So the Tennessee Titans come to town. This is our last primetime game. It's a Sunday night football game, NBC. Matt LaFleur's old team where he was the offensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans. There'll be some, I'm sure, stories and talk about that. But the Titans are a sneaky good team who managed to make the playoffs and run all the way to the AFC Championship game before being stopped by the Kansas City Chiefs. Derrick Henry emerged even more than he already did as a premier running back in the league. And I think that unless the Packers they fix their running back or their run stopping defense, which I haven't really seen them do yet this offseason, I think that we will lose our first and last home game against the Tennessee Titans on Sunday Night Football. So that puts us at 4 losses. 5 losses. Who do I have us losing to? Let's look back at it because I didn't take notes on that one. I see the Saints. I see the 49ers. I see us splitting the Vikings. That's 3. I see the Lions. That's 4. And then I see the Titans as our 5th loss of the year. So that would put us at 10-5 heading into the final week matchup against the Bears. It's 2021 at that point. Again, the Chicago matchups at Soldier Field. They like these late matchups, preferably against these divisional rivals on the schedule. I think the Packers take care of business once again at Chicago, and they would finish the season. My final season predictions, looking at the schedule, has them finishing right around that 11-5 mark on the season. So 11-5, in theory, is strong enough to get you into the playoffs. I don't think 11-5 will get you anywhere close to the first round bye or the number 1 seed, which, remember, only the number 1 seed in this year's upcoming playoffs gets a bye week. So when we talk about the Packers essentially having their bye week in week 5 and having their having to play football from October 18th all the way to the Super Bowl, that is an extremely long and unkind stretch that the Packers will have to go through adversity and possible injuries and limp together some victories and stay focused and rejuvenated as they head into the playoffs. But 11-5 is the final record. My overall thoughts looking at this schedule, I think I said it at the very top of the video, but it is a tough grind. The NFL was not kind to the Green Bay Packers with how they laid out this entire schedule. And it's really fascinating. We've known the opponents for the Packers for a couple of months now, but when you actually see it laid out and you have to look at it and piece together, okay, where's your road trips? Where's your short weeks? What do you have for back-to-back opponents? I don't think that that things shake out very well. It's going to be an absolute task for the Packers to come away with anything better than a 12-4 record. Quite frankly, they're going to have to really be one of the top teams in the league. And I'm not saying they can't be, but the realist in me also knows that it's very difficult to go out there and win all 16 games. And there's going to be games that surprise us along the ways too, that you think that you're going to win, like heading down to Los Angeles to face the Chargers. You think you're going to come away with a win, and then all of a sudden you just get your ass handed to you. That's what happens. So I'm going to wrap up the video. I appreciate you guys for tuning in once again. Leave your predictions down in the comments as far as what you think the Packers season ends at. Go ahead and even go a step further and make your predictions of who you think the Packers will lose to in the upcoming season. I'm interested what you guys have to think on that side of things. Like I said, I have them losing to the Vikings at least once. I have them losing to the Saints. I have them losing to the Niners. I have them losing to the Lions on the road. And then I have them losing at home against the Tennessee Titans. But what do I know? I picked them to win every year, and they only went 13-3 and made it to the NFC Championship game. So I was close, but I was still a little bit of a ways away. So as always, guys, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, I will see you on the internet. Thanks for watching.